Ladies and gentlemen, this is Joseph Hewes. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching. Okay, the purpose of this video is the Nuremberg Trials of 1946, 47, whenever it took place. Were they legitimate? Were they legitimate trials? Okay, now, of course, many of you know I'm a big international relations buff, having studied that in school. And I'm on YouTube, and I'm looking for informative videos about the Nuremberg trial. And unfortunately, the only thing I'm really finding is basically American propaganda about the trials. Okay? Now, don't get me wrong. Yeah, I'm a proud American citizen, and I don't mind American propaganda sometimes, especially as it relates to World War II. I do think of us as the good guys during World War II, but I do recognize propaganda when I see it. And the Nuremberg trials is a major area where if you try to study it, you're going to run into a lot of American propaganda. In other words, the trials were legitimate, and that's really just about the only thing you're going to find. Okay, now, believe it or not, there was a great deal of question at the time whether they were legitimate or not. And to be honest, I'm of the opinion that they were not legitimate. Okay, now, of course, the German position, as expressed by Hermann Goering, was that it was nothing more than victor's justice. And I'll be honest, I tend to lean in that direction. Okay, now, of course, if you read the Wikipedia page for the Nuremberg trial, you are going to get this propaganda. Okay, you are going to get this American propaganda. You're not going to get a full picture of the question at hand. Okay, now, of course, in the introduction of the Wikipedia page, they talk about the need for the trial and the considerations of what are we going to do? We got these Nazis, these really bad guys who committed these horrible crimes against humanity. How can we put them on trial? Okay, now, of course, the British, with Winston Churchill famously saying we should just take them out back and shoot them. I'll be honest with you. I wouldn't have minded that option. It's straightforward. It's accomplishing what you wanted to accomplish, and in the context of the war, it was what it was. So I'm not going to say I'm completely on board with that, but I don't have too much of a problem with that. I mean, the Nazis were the Nazis. They were the bad guys, after all. And there's a second option offered by the Soviet Union to have a show trial. Okay. Now, of course, I'm sure that the Soviet Union didn't frame it that way. So, in other words, the Soviet Union said, "We'll put them on trial. We'll put them on trial," and the West said, "No, I don't think so. We know how you guys do trials." And of course, they did trials the same way the Nazis did trials. They just, they have a lot of cameras. They control the evidence. They control the testimony. They manipulate the evidence, manipulate the testimony, and it's a foregone conclusion everybody's going to be executed anyways. Okay, so that was a Soviet option. And then, of course, Wikipedia kind of insinuates that the third option was to have a legitimate trial, which is where the propaganda comes in, which is where the Nuremberg trials are crowned as the legitimate trial that took place. Okay, now, I would make the case that the three options were basically this. The British wanted to take them out back and shoot them. Soviets wanted to have a show trial, their version. And the United States wanted to have our show trial, our version. Okay? That's what I think the Nuremberg trials were. Okay, now, when you think about a judicial system or a justice system, in the Western sense of the word, it is the bedrock foundation of a justice system is having consent of the people governed, or in the case of a judicial system, the consent of those who are being judged. And that was completely absent in the case of the Nuremberg Trials. In other words, the Germans didn't consent to this. They didn't consent to it in any way, shape, or form. They weren't party to the agreements that took place. They formed the trials. Now think of what consent is. Basically, in the United States, we have a constitution that was created, that created the government, 1/3 of which is the judiciary. American representatives are voted for by the population. Those representatives either vote down or ratify the Constitution, thereby giving consent to the governing mechanism, and in this case, the judicial system. That was absent during the Nuremberg trials because the Germans did not consent to the trials. They did not ratify a treaty. They did not sign a constitution. They did not ratify a constitution. They were subjected to the justice of the winning side of World War II. Okay, now, in the case, you can take, even in the case of the Japanese, of course, now we're talking about international agreements. That's one of the reasons, that's one of the excuses that was given why they held the trial, one of the justifications. If you watch the movie, The Bridge on the River Kwai, you see the British commander saying to the Japanese commander, "That's against the Geneva Convention! That's against the Geneva Convention!" But there's no mention that the Japanese were not members of the Geneva Convention. The Japanese never signed the Geneva Convention. The Japanese never ratified the Geneva Convention. And the only way you're held responsible for the Geneva Convention is to be party to the convention. So there were no conventions before World War II that bound the Germans to being put on trial by the Americans, the British, the French, and the Russians. And yet, we put them on trial. Okay? So it's my opinion that the Nuremberg trials were illegitimate. That it was, in fact, victor's justice. Okay, now don't read into that I'm taking the sides of the Nazis, because certainly I thought they were the bad guys, and certainly I don't have any problems with them, meeting their fate, being shot, hanged, whatever. But what I do object to is the Nuremberg trials being portrayed as a legitimate international trial, because it's missing many elements necessary for legitimacy. But anyways, the main reason I'm posting this video is because there's nothing on YouTube that's critical of the Nuremberg trials. You can't find it. The American propaganda has taken hold as if it is gospel. And this is kind of another one of those fake history kind of things. Justice Hugo Black, a former Supreme Court Justice of the United States, was the chief counsel for the United States, and he had a colleague back on the Supreme Court of the United States who called this a show trial, who basically said this was a sham, that the international law did not support it, and that is my opinion. I believe that the Nuremberg trials were show trials. Yes, the Nazis were the bad guys, but there was no legitimacy to the trials. So, anyways, post in the comments if you disagree with me. I'd love to hear what you think. But I think that this study, this subject really has been lacking in critical analysis. So, anyways, there it is. That's my take on the Nuremberg show trials as conducted by the United States. Oh, one last thing. Just want to add, you've got the Soviet Union as one of the accusing parties during the trial. Okay, now, of course, there's kind of a major problem here because the Soviet Union committed just as many crimes during World War II as the Nazis did. And in fact, you might even be able to make the case that Americans committed war crimes too, when you talk about Dresden and other things as well. But anyways, that's my take on the Nuremberg show trials and the fact that I believe that they were illegitimate and should not be held as high as they are held in intellectual circles and in academia. And post in the comments. Let me know what you think. I'd love to hear what you think. Joseph Hewes, signing out.